Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cured Collective podcast. It's great to have you back on the show. Thank you for tuning in week after week. Thank you for sharing the show. Thank you for being here and being part of the Cured Collective. It's much appreciated. We appreciate you and your interest and dedication to being part of our mission. Today on the podcast, we are in it'll be week 3 of Mushroom March. And as we've teed up the conversation, today will be a discussion on psychedelics, specifically on psilocybin mushrooms, which is a very exciting podcast and something that I believe is gaining a lot of traction, and rightfully so. But as I say over and over and over again, and really hope everybody takes this to heart and holds other people accountable as much as possible. These conversations are these conversations are created to help open up larger conversations. And I will sit here and say, I'm not a doctor. I am not an expert on what is actually going on in the clinical settings. So I'm not somebody who is actually doing these studies. So always consult a physician before embarking on one of these journeys. And we are not liable for any of your own exploration in this world. But with all that said, I will say that I will share anecdotal experience, and you will hear anecdotal experience. And just make sure you make the right choices, because this is a very powerful conversation. These are powerful tools. These are life-changing tools, and they are so exciting. And we will start today's conversation on the research and studies that are going on in clinical settings, specifically at Johns Hopkins. So we talked about the world of fungi. We talked about mushrooms at large. And we talked about the difference between culinary mushrooms, functional mushrooms, and now we're going to talk about psilocybin or psychedelic mushrooms, and the studies that are going on with them at Johns Hopkins, and just some really, really interesting topics. So one thing that I want to first clarify is that there's a difference between micro and macro dosing, and the studies that are going on at Johns Hopkins that we'll talk about today are mainly on the macro dose. So doses, I actually didn't look at the dose dependent piece of this, but in upwards of like multiple grams, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 grams of psilocybe mushrooms would be a macro dose. But when you actually extract it down to the actual psilocybin concentration of psilocybin, it wouldn't be that many grams. When I say grams, I'm talking about like eating whole mushrooms. And then the concentration of psilocybin in that will be much less. But the dry weight of mushrooms is probably would be in the multiples of grams. And that's when somebody would have a macro or mystical type experience. 5 grams, 6 grams, 10 grams. Or above. And so just make sure you do your research and you try to understand this as much as possible before ever embarking on this journey. But psilocybin is very exciting because, as Dr. Roland Griffith presents in his TED Med talk, psilocybin can occasion mystical experiences similar to experiences described by mystics of the past. So what he means by this, and how I interpret this is, and know anecdotally from my own experience, is that psilocybin creates experiences that are almost impossible to explain, that almost seem mythological or mystic, as one would say. And as we look at the history of the world, we look at the history of humans, there are stories and tales told among cultures about these mystical type experiences where we are coming into contact with something that is almost unexplainable in the physical realm that we know day to day. And so this being the case, this sparks a question about what might be going on here. And what does this mean for consciousness? What does this mean for what we understand to be real life and the power of our minds and the power and trueness and um, ability for us to truly understand what consciousness is. Psilocybin has been used for over thousands of years in various cultures for healing and spiritual experience. So this is in alignment with that statement. We know, or we're learning, as I don't remember his name, so I'm uh, sad that I didn't look it up beforehand, and I can actually look it up right in front of me. But the book, The Immortality Key, Immortality. I'm going to look it up right now. Immortality Key book by Brian. Yeah, there it is. The Immortality Key, written by Brian Muraseku. Oh man, I'm terrible at this. But The Immortality Key, written by Brian C.M. The Secret and History of Religion with No Name, talks about uh, the belief that we actually have found relics of the past, and specifically through the Bible and teachings that show, or one might have had the ability to deduce that um, the wine that was drinking in some stories in the Bible was actually spiked with psilocybin mushrooms. And there are stories in the Bible and ancient texts that talk about mystical experiences, but they were accommodated by psilocybin mushrooms. And so when we start to learn more and more about this history, we start to have so many questions sparked, because were these tools part of the greatest stories of our existence that show up in the religious and spiritual practices? And it seems like that is truly the case. So, what's really exciting is the stories of the past and the understanding that these tools have been used for thousands of years. And what's been going on in most recent history is that the research has actually been blocked for decades, because it was thought that the risks were far greater than the potential upsides when it comes to studying psilocybin mushrooms. And it's actually changed, and Johns Hopkins has been on the forefront of this work. And so what's going on at Johns Hopkins is studies really in three kind of silos. And what they're doing is they are doing macro dose type testing. And these sessions begin in a living room type environment where the patient and a guide, a therapist, have developed a very trusting and extremely safe environment. So there has been a preface to these experiences, and in that work before these actual sessions with psilocybin, the patient and their therapist or their guide have developed this very trusting relationships. They've built rapport, and the patient feels in such a incredible way that they are very safe. And these living room type environments make someone feel at home, per se. And one thing that you hear over and over again is that the most important thing when going into these sessions is set and setting. So that's mind set. How is your mind? What is the set of your mind? And what is the actual physical setting? The two most important things when going into any psychedelic or psilocybin type experience. They've done over 600 sessions with 245 patients. And these experiences are described and felt to be more real than waking experiences, which means they are like mystical. They are more real than waking type experiences. And when polled 1 month after these sessions, 80% of the volunteers in the study reported that the experience was among the 5 most spiritually significant experiences of their lives. 50% said it was the number 1 most life-transforming experience, above experiences like childbirth. So it was the most transformational experience of their life. above childbirth. And let me tell you, childbirth is a wild, wild experience. 90% reports that they had increased life satisfaction and positive behavioral change, including increased mood and better social relationships. These effects have been shown to be sustained for a year and longer. Those are incredible numbers. 80% of volunteers in the study report that experience was among the 5 most spiritually significant experiences of their lives. 50% said it was the number 1 most life transforming experience. And 90% report increased life satisfaction and positive behavioral change. Now, the 3 groups that they were studying or have been studying at Johns Hopkins are psychologically distressed end of life cancer patients, cigarette smokers seeking abstinence, and then long-term meditators. So 3 very different groups of people. Let's talk about the end-of-life distressed cancer patients. They are individuals that met the criteria for depressive states from their situation, from their diagnosis and terminal illness with cancer. 92% of the high-dose patients showed clinically significant improvements 5 weeks after the session, and that's in macro dosing. So when you compare that to microdosing, they were actually studying the two. Microdosing was a 32% improvement in uh, their actual acceptance of what is going on in their life and where they are at with their diagnosis. So 92% of high-dose patients showed clinically significant improvements 5 weeks after sessions. High-dose results sustained at 79% 6 months after the session. So these psychologically distressed end-of-life cancer patients reported that 6 months after their session, they showed clinically significant improvements in their acceptance to what the situation was at 79% of a rate. That's really amazing. The biggest fears of our lives are the end of our lives, right? And what does it mean to die? And how do we accept the quote unquote death sentence? And can we be okay with it? And they're saying that 92% of high-dose patients showed these improvements after 5 weeks in just one session. And then 79% sustained this after 6 months. It's absolutely incredible. When it comes to the cigarette smokers seeking abstinence, the long-term smokers just simply have not been able to break their addiction. We all have experienced some type of addiction, and we all can sit here and understand and say that, yeah, it's almost one of the most difficult things to break. Like when we start to come to accept the truth that we have addictions and we understand how much they can control of our lives, it's very difficult to come to terms with that. These sessions with the cigarette smokers seeking abstinence were aligned with what was considered a planned quit date. And up to this date of quitting smoking, they were doing cognitive behavioral therapy sessions. So 6 weeks, I think, precluding the session. And at 6 months, the studies showed after these sessions, 80% abstinence rates. This has never been shown with anything ever before. It's absolutely incredible. When we looked at long-term, when Johns Hopkins looked at long-term meditators, these are people that have been meditating for a very long time, and what's said is that meditation and psilocybin are complementary processes for investigating the nature of our mind. Both produce similar changes in the brain regions related to a sense of self, what we think about ourselves. But what is said is that meditation is the long-term tried and true course, and psilocybin is the crash course. So anybody who's practiced meditation and has seen significant improvement in their overall life and their understanding and sense of self can then think about, okay, all of that work that we've done, when you compare it to psilocybin is the crash course in that journey. And what individuals have reported that the benefits have not only been to their overall life, but a huge improvement in their sitting and non-sitting practices. These effects are shown reliably and dose dependent. So what they're saying here is that these things are starting to be understood more and more, and they are extremely reliable and also dose dependent. Psilocybin occasioning mystical experiences in most people studied virtually identical to those that occur and naturally suggest that these experiences are biologically normal. So, what we're saying by that is that these experiences shown that are showing that these things, these experiences that people are experiencing, are a biologically normal experience. So the question is, why are we wired? So the experience through meditation is a biologically normal process. So you can experience a mystical type experience and understand your sense of self through meditation. It also can be occasioned through these psilocybin journeys. So what we're saying here is that this is a biologically normal process. The thing that we're experiencing, the experience that we're going into through these psilocybin sessions are biologically normal. So the question is, why are we wired to have these salient, felt, and said to be sacred experiences of encountering ultimate reality and understanding and feeling the interconnectedness of all people and all things? These experiences that are arguably provide the basis of every ethical and moral code common to all world religions. So, what is going on here is, as I said in the beginning, these experiences are helping people understand the ultimate reality of their interconnectedness, interconnected to other people, to nature, to every living being on this planet. And they're said to provide the very basis of ethical and moral codes common to all world religions. So there's a through line here. The stories of the past are starting to be more well understood by understanding these experiences that people are going through in these psilocybin journeys. There's something about the mystical experience that relates intimately to the very nature of consciousness. If you direct your attention inward, you become aware that you are aware. This inner knowing is at the core of our humanity, and we realize at some deep level we are all in this journey together. You hear people say that, but to actually get to the knowing that we are all on this same journey together, sitting on a spinning ball, hurling through space, and becoming aware of the fact that we are aware and understanding that that is our inner knowing. This is what it can be understood by going through these mystical type experiences. And for me to sit here, and I'm really repeating much of what was said in the TED Med talk from Dr. Roland Griffith, is by understanding and doing these studies, we're starting to understand more and more about our ultimate reality and how our consciousness truly works and what our consciousness truly is. We can sit here and say, this work and the investigation of the inner knowing of who we are and what we're meant to do in this world and how we all are connected could truly provide a rise to a mass worldview shift. If more and more people can start to understand and go through these experiences, we can have an awakening and start to understand and develop a true inner peace, joy, and gratitude that most people truly find unimaginable. We go through our lives and we've heard the quote, most men live lives of quiet desperation. And what we truly are all seeking is a true sense of inner peace and joy and gratitude for this experience and true fulfillment. And these tools can truly be the key to unlocking all of our ability to actually have this life and to actually understand that we are all connected and we all deserve to start to live life differently. And if we could all actually truly come together and shift our worldview through these types of experiences, that we could truly find peace in this world. Further research is crucial and may prove to be the very survival of our species. And I'm quoting Dr. Roland Griffith on this, but I truly agree with him. You know, some people can write off very quickly, oh, this is just woo woo, and you're a druggie, or you're a hippie, or you're out of your mind. And I I really want to sit here and just say stop for 1 second. If that has ever been you, or if that is somebody that is in your life that maybe you've mentioned psychedelics or psilocybin, and say that this is something that, or you've experienced it and you've said this is my experience, this is my felt experience, and this is what's true for me in this, but you've been written off. I truly highly recommend passing that individual to these studies to look up Dr. Roland Griffith and truly start to understand what's going on in the clinical settings, so we can then take those true scientific and mystical type understandings and results and bring them into our day-to-day understanding of what could be possible through this experience and through this research, and how we can truly create a future that is different than the past. Because our most recent past have been very shut off from our true inner knowing, and there's been so much suppression of this spiritual and mystical type exploration. We put band-aids on our experiences, and we've been brought into a understanding that that's all we get is a band-aid. But what if we could actually rip the band-aid off and go deep into our inner knowings and start to actually truly change our lives? Similar to the way that these psychologically distressed end-of-life cancer patients were able to come to terms with their death. The cigarette smokers were able to actually obtain abstinence at 80% success rates. This data is mind-blowing, and it's so exciting to me. It's so exciting to us at Cured Nutrition, and that's why we talk about this stuff. That's why we are exploring the world of functional mushrooms, to open up the minds and open up everybody's minds to all the mushrooms and the potential for us to really, truly, deeply use and connect with nature in the way that we are supposed to, and for our world to start to look different. I'm blown away, and I love to share these studies with you all, and I highly recommend sharing this podcast, but also diving further into the work that's going on at Johns Hopkins. And I want to thank you all for tuning in again to another episode of the Cured Collective podcast. I hope this was eye-opening and exciting for you as it is for me. If you learned something from this, if you enjoyed it, please share it. And that is it for today. We will catch you all on the next episode. Thanks, everybody.